Hey everybody, I just want to do a quick video, and I want to ask the question, what is exactly expository preaching? In the church, you might hear, everybody says, what does the church need and what's the church looking for? And somebody might say, well, what the church needs, it needs more expository preaching. And, I would hear that all the time, and I'm thinking, that if that is something that means going back to the Bible and doing what it says and looking for the truth and everything, then fine, that's what the church needs. But the question is, what exactly is expository preaching? I mean, when I was, I've asked several people this question and just, what exactly is expository preaching? And the answer you get is not exactly always clear. I mean, you're going to get varied answers. You're going to get some people who say one thing and somebody else will say something else. So that's the question. What exactly is it? How do you define it? How do you pinpoint exactly what an expository preaching is? And so the basic, from what I could gather, what some people say is, well, the word expository, it means to expose, right? It means to take the text and expose it and tell exactly what it means for what it is in that context. Like, for example, you might take the Beatitudes, okay? You might take Matthew 5, verses 3 through 9, I believe it is. And you've got these Beatitudes where Jesus, it says he went up and sat on the mount, and he sat down and he began to preach, and he talks about these characteristics of people who are in the kingdom, okay? Like, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those that mourn, for they shall be comforted, and everything like that. And so they would say, what you do is, here's the purest view, okay? They'll say that what you do is you take Matthew 5, verses 3 to 9, and you just preach that, and you take like 3 points, and you never leave that context. You do not leave Matthew 5. For example, you might make your point. Your first point would be from verse 3 or something, and you would just stay right there. Every sub-point would be from there. You don't leave that context. You don't go to another passage. You don't go outside of that context. Okay? So that's the purest view, that says that it has to be right there in the chapter. You don't leave that at all for nothing, So, okay, that's the purest. Then there's a view that says expository preaching is where you take a passage, and we'll just take the same one. We'll take Matthew 5, verses 3 to 9 or whatever, and you make your point, but your sub-points may or may not come from another passage. For example, you might say, blessed are the poor in spirit, and then whenever you drive that point home, you might say, okay, I'm going to go to the example of David, where it talks about in the Psalms, where it says, he talks about the Lord are close to those who are of a broken and contrite spirit. That's the attitude of the Beatitudes, okay? Which rhymes. But anyways, so that's, to me, that is expository preaching. As long as you don't go over to Psalms and start talking about David's life and get off sidetracked and everything. So that's, to me, that's what the definition of an expository preacher sermon is. And I don't see anything wrong with going to outside of the context for your, outside of the chapter and verses, just for a sub point. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you do it the right way. And that would be considered, that's the other view. So you've got the purist view, and then you've got that view. And I tend to come down, what I believe an expository sermon is, I come down on the latter view, on the one that's not the purist view. Because I preached a sermon before, and I made my points, and there were times where I would briefly refer to another scripture outside of my main passage, just to drive the point home. And you know, there was some that thought it was an expository sermon and some that didn't. Some, you know, even said that at best it was a topical sermon. And you know, I can take constructive criticism, that's fine, and it helped me. But my point is that, you know, in my opinion, it was an expository sermon. But either way, it's, you know, it's fine. It is what it is. But those are just my thoughts about, you know, what exactly an expository sermon is or is not. And it seems to me that, you know, you can't ever get a clear example or a clear answer of what that is exactly. And if you go on and do research on this question, I've went online and looked up, you know, researched what is an expository sermon and looked at all these different sources and tried to figure this out, and you never get a clear answer. You never come away with just a good firm definition of what expository preaching is. So, you know, I don't feel that bad that I'm still sometimes wondering, okay, what exactly is it? I mean, I have in my mind what I would think it is, what I would consider an expository sermon, but that's from a lot of time trying to figure it out, asking and talking to people and looking it up, and finally just coming to my own conclusion that this is what it is. It's a sermon where you take a passage and you give your main points that will have the verses of that main passage. For example, what we used, the Sermon on the Mount. And if you have a point on the subpoints that briefly refers to another passage, as long as you don't drift off from the subject and go too far, it's fine. It doesn't take away from the passage. You're still exposing the passage. And you know, I see nothing wrong with that. So that to me is what an expository sermon is. And so thanks. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you next time.